They're on here? Okay. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Have your attention. This is Monday, April 26th, Public Safety Committee. Councilman Smith, Chairman, joined by Councilman Cardenas, Councilwoman Perry. Mr. Zine is on his way. With no objection, we'll take number 5 and 7 as consent. We have one request by Mr. Cardenas on number 6 for clarification. So if we could begin with number 6, just for clarification.
8 was going on consent as well.
Item 6, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to grant award in the amount of $375,000 for the 2009 Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force Recovery Act program.
Hold 8 on the table pending.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just need a quick clarification. It appears that the 32% required to go to basically a third non-governmental party, and in this case it appears to be CAS. They do wonderful work on human trafficking. However, I'm looking at the report here, and it looks like it's about 350,000 or so, but the grant is for 375. The breakdown doesn't seem to match. Probably just a typographical error or something?
The award for CAS is 120.
Your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Kimberly Agbumpler. I'm from the Los Angeles Police Department.
That's 120, yes. That I was just noting that. Thank you for engaging such a great organization. However, the overall 375,000, I'm looking at the breakdown of the management analyst to 70%, LAPD, outreach to media, travel, all those things. And then it says total 375, but it doesn't add up to 375. What might be missing in that table? It says 89,000 for the management analyst 2, the LAPD overtime 91,000 and change, outreach and media campaign 32,000 and change, travel 16,000 and change, translation services 6,000, office supplies 1,000.
The bottom paragraph, Jason Clean, Office of the CAO.
Yes.
The bottom paragraph refers to the $255,000
55. Okay.
that the city is receiving, and then the paragraph above that is the $120,000 that CAS will receive.
Got
so
it.
between the two of those, it's the $375 for the
Okay,
grant.
makes sense. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, that's
Appreciate it. Thank you.
moved by Mr. Cardenas, second by Ms. Perry, approved by the committee. Thank you.
Committee members, there's a CA report that came into the committee for this item. You wish to approve the CA report.
CA report.
Thank you.
And then let's go to item number 1.
Item 1, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to the status of ongoing efforts by the Police Department to reduce the backlog of DNA evidence kits.
DNA.
Good morning. The report, Kevin McClure, Commanding Officer, Robbery Homicide Division. The report that you should have before you is the February report.
No, this is item 1.
Item 1, right? Item 1?
1.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the high-end?
This is the quarterly report.
Yvette Sanchez-Owens, I'm the commanding officer of SID LAPD. We continue to make a dent in the backlog, the historical backlog. We're somewhere below 500 kits remaining in that backlog. However, we still do not have capacity in-house to handle everything coming in contemporary. So we are adding to that backlog, and somewhere in the neighborhood of around, around 2,000 right now, 2,000 kits?
1,800.
1,800 kits left in that backlog. We are making progress on the hiring. We have interviewed over 40 candidates for the position of criminalist. We made a selection of 10. 5 of those were already employed by the city. 4 of them were lab techs within SID, and 1 was a clerk typist within SID that just finished their college degree in chemistry and now is able to come in as a criminalist. The 5 that are internal candidates should be up and running by the May 1st funding date, and the other 5 are in backgrounds now.
On those candidates you said that just finished their college degree in chemistry, what was their previous position?
Clerk typist.
Okay, so there's no natural bridge then from that?
No.
Okay.
This was a product of the fact that we are on the campus of Cal State LA. This young man was working for us as a clerk typist and going to school at the same time in the criminalistics program, and now has transitioned right into our
That's
lab.
great news. It's unfortunate we don't have assistance for them to do that and kind
Exactly.
of encourage that like we used to years ago. But so they're doing it on their own volition to
Yes.
advance.
Yes.
But there's no natural bridge for them to do that from clerk typist.
No.
Would there be a way for them to move from clerk typist to a higher civil service classification during their college education so that they would have a natural bridge, they wouldn't have to go through a selection process and wait all that time?
Not that I'm aware of, not into the criminalist series. They may be able to go, and I don't know off the top of my head what the criteria is, but I believe they can go as a bridge class into management aid, which is a transition into the management analyst series.
And they can't make a jump from there either, then they have to go to an MA status before they can make a jump to criminalist probably. So it's a long impossible road if they want
Yeah.
to move. Okay.
As long as they have the science background to be a criminalist.
Okay.
David Doan, Chief of Detectives. Funding-wise, Department is certainly anxious to make sure that the money that we've led to believe will be in this year's new budget, the $3 million to help us continue to outsource DNA kits will continue to be a priority, and we'll make it into the budget. We feel that's critical for us to be able to maintain the progress that we've made on reducing the historical backlog, as well as to try to keep pace with the current cases that are coming in. So that, to the department's view, is critical to our success in this area.
When we say that, when you say we had added to the backlog, there's this kind of double counting that goes on because of the FBI rule that we have to, when we get a hit, then we have to go back before we can upload it to coders, we have to do it again. Is that causing part of that, or is it strictly we don't have enough criminalists to be processing the additional kits we're getting in right now?
We're keeping stats on both sides of that issue. One is actual testing of the kits. That's the numbers that I cited. The other is the technical review. It's not a complete retest of a kit that has gone out for outsourcing. It's a review of all the data that was supplied by the outsource company. We review it to make sure that it's technically sound and that they came to the appropriate conclusions supported by that information, and then we evaluate it as to whether or not it's uploadable into CODIS, and then we upload it if it is.
The requirement for this is a rule established by the FBI that we have, along with the council and the mayor's office, have challenged that question. It is being looked at again by the FBI to see if there was not a process for labs who have maintained a high level of proficiency, and I would point out that we have yet to find any of the work from the labs that we've been using that did not meet the standards expected of our lab for the purposes of uploading. And we're hoping that some process like that, where there's random evaluations of their quality of their work, would allow their material to be uploaded without as much review by us. So we're hopeful that some process in that fashion would eliminate that, what we're referring to as a secondary backlog.
And just FYI to the committee as well as yourselves, Mr. Garcetti and I were in Washington a few weeks ago on this issue. We found a very receptive audience in the Congress and the Senate. It's the FBI that's still the problem. They said to the FBI, if you guys don't find some accommodation, we will bring in legislation, which the FBI certainly doesn't want.
Well, the department had a meeting with the assistant director who runs the laboratory. He came and met with the department as well as our local assistant director. And we had a very good conversation about the issue, and we're satisfied that they're going to have a very good review. Now, whether it'll come up with an answer we're happy with, that's the purpose of the review. But I do think that they're going to take a legitimate look at this and understand that one size does not fit all, that there are parts of the country perhaps where there needs to be more rigorous review of outside laboratories work. And so we're hoping for some process that will verify the quality of the work that's being produced and then apply it across the laboratories in the United States. So we're hopeful that there'll be some movement. We'll see.
I think we'll see something by the end of the year. Whether it's enough or not, that's another
Correct.
question. We'll see something there. And one other thing I recently found out is that the state system allows a lower level of loci hits than the federal level does. I think it's Fed's 13,
Correct.
the state 7. Are we uploading to the state system at least if we don't get a full 13?
Yes, we upload to both.
Okay. So, but if we get 8 or 9 loci hits, not enough for CODIS, are we just doing that only to the state then?
We upload to as many databases as we possibly
Good.
can.
All right. I think that's all right. Ms. Perry?
I want to ask just 2 quick questions. What renders a kit unsuitable for testing?
One major thing that would mean that we wouldn't test it would be that they determine that no crime has been committed. That's one of the major reasons.
Okay, so then for the month of February, there were 44 cases that were determined to be unsuitable, and for year-to-date, that was 85. So would that be the primary reason, or?
It could be other reasons as well. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
There's a whole, some of the kits, we don't actually get a product inside. We just get a report on the inside, so there's nothing to be tested, nothing that's there. The victims don't always have to release the information to us, and when they don't, the form from the hospitals is put inside that report. On top of that, sometimes there's something that could have been destroyed. I mean, there's a whole list of issues that come into that, and there's not really one specific thing, but yeah, there's a whole list of things that come into play.
And then on a monthly basis, do you have a target for how many you hope to get in the process, or is it entirely dependent on the flow of money you have to pay for the time?
Well, we prioritize based on what's the crime we're dealing with and what type of activity we have, and we also have homicide cases in which we do DNA work on as well. So each of those are applied to the standards of classifications, and the highest priorities, the ones with the greatest risks, are always done first. There are no high-risk cases left in the historical backlog. Those are all ones where we have named suspects, date rape, that type of older cases are there. So we stay right on top of that to make sure that the ones where you have an unknown rapist, the predator types, those cases are always processed with a high priority as would a homicide case.
Okay. And for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Zine. Mr. Cardenas. Mr. Zine? Okay. All right, thank you very much. This is an ongoing informational item, so we'll note and file. And I'd ask Yvette, if you would meet with my staff to go over some of the display and how it is presented. There are some concerns about clarity in the way it's presented, so I'd appreciate if you...
Which are we talking about, the monthly report we provide to
I'm
you?
talking about the chart.
Yes, that'll be Captain McClure and I, not...
Pardon me?
We're talking about
Yeah.
the report?
Yep.
That's us,
Okay.
not her.
All right.
So we'll meet with your staff, sir.
Appreciate that. All right, thank you very much. That item is noted and filed. Item number 2.
Item 2, a motion Garcetti Corretz instructing the police department to report relative to reconciling the DNA database inventory FBI requirements that outsourced kits be tested again in-house, and creating a notification procedure for alerting rape victims changes in status of their cases.
Kind of did
Pretty
that.
much the material
Yeah.
we've already presented. Is there some
Same
other question?
thing, note and file. Okay. Item number 3.
Item 3, motion Zion Smith instructing the police department to report relative to the status of the digital in-car video camera system.
Good morning.
Morning.
Maggie Goodrich, LAPD. I've provided a handout for each of you that summarizes what we've done over the last month. And I'll just run through that for you real quickly. As you know, last time I was here, we were just continuing that standalone testing. We completed that. Per your request, Councilmember Smith, we also went to the Valley to do some testing under the LED lights. We didn't see any adverse effects under those lights. We also, in addition to continuing to have the senior lead officers in Southeast do some testing. We expanded the rollout to the gang unit as well as Southeast, so we'd get a higher volume of use. That testing went well. So actually yesterday morning, starting at 0600, we rolled out to all of patrol at Southeast. We've been operational for 24 hours now, a little over, and it's going well. In the first 24 hours, we had a little over about 35 and a half hours of video uploaded, which equates to a little over an hour of video, basically per unit throughout that 24-hour period. And it seems to be going well. The wireless uploads are working. I have staff on site as well as IBM and Coban staff on site. We'll be there monitoring, helping officers as they have questions, but so far it's going very well. We haven't seen any significant issues, and we'll be monitoring that progress over the next several weeks. My plan is to watch this work in Southeast for about 30 days, assess how it's going, make sure we don't have any significant issues, and then at that point begin the training for 77th, and that would be the next area we would go to roll out in-car video. So things have gone quite well over the last month.
Very good. Question for you, the only question I have is, we saw a little notation here about that the officer would be given a copy of it if it's necessary to go to court. Was that for their own defense rep, or was that to represent to the department and bring to the court?
What we did is I was in front of Police Commission last week with a special order that indicates how an officer might request a copy. That would typically be if we receive a discovery request or an officer is going to court to appear on a prosecution. So that would be the process by which they would actually request a copy of the video on a CD or DVD to bring to court for the attorneys. And then we also implemented a control log, so we are clear that a supervisor has authorized the burning of that CD or DVD, and then when the officer comes back from court, they have to indicate either bring the receipt from court if it was introduced in evidence, or indicate which attorney kept the copy if they were to hand it over as part of a discovery request.
So if there's a discovery request, it goes directly to the attorney, not through the officer. But if it's requested for court evidence, then the officer brings it with them?
Correct.
Just like their notebook or anything else?
Yes.
All right. Very good. Yeah. Ms. Perry?
I'm fine.
Mr. Zion?
How far behind schedule are we with this program? How many years are we behind?
We'll do before Maggie and then after Maggie. Let's be fair.
I'm not going to fault you because you came in after the fact, but what we originally planned to where we are.
My understanding, and I want to make sure I'm correct about this, my understanding was that I think the contract was originally signed in the summer of 2008, and it was predicted to be about a 4-month implementation, so I think the goal was by end of 2008 for it to be rolled out, or at least the rollout to begin.
Is that for just South Bureau?
Yes.
Okay, and then you've got one division of South Bureau online now, 77 will be the next. When do we expect South Bureau to be fully complete with all the divisions in South Bureau?
I'm taking a cautious approach because of the history with the project, so I've added some padding in there to make sure that if there are issues that arise, we have time to resolve them. My goal is that by August 1st, all of South Bureau would be done. I'd like to speed that up and make it sooner, but we'll have to see how it goes in Southeast over the next 30 days, and then we can...
August of what year?
I'm sorry?
August of what year?
2010.
Not that he's a skeptic.
No, I know before you got here, it was really a mess, so I commend you making it move forward. Will that include South Traffic Division?
Yes.
So all of South Bureau will be complete?
Yes.
Do we have any funding for the other parts of the police department, the other divisions, the other bureaus, I should say?
My understanding is that we do not in the, I don't believe I saw anything in the mayor's proposed budget for next year.
Nothing, okay. So it'll be South Bureau for now, and if money comes aboard or federal grants, then we can do. And do we have a pecking order, which will be the next bureau after South Bureau?
Yes, my understanding is the Central Bureau is slated to be next, and I am working with IBM to understand what that pricing would look like. But my understanding was when the contract was approved with IBM, that council had asked that the system be operational for 6 months and that we come back and report on the progress of the project. And at that time, there would be a consideration of further funding for Central Bureau.
Okay, excellent. All right, good. Now, you're doing a fine job with it, so I want to commend
you.
you on that, making it work.
Thank you.
Dr. Cardenas? Okay, that is also a note and file. Is there no objection? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work. Item number 4.
Item 4, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to amending the Major Crimes Division standards and procedures to incorporate access of the Inspector General into the Police Department's secure working environment, sensitive compartmentalized information facility.
Good morning, members of the committee. Richard T. Fank, Executive Director of the Board of Police Commissioners. Before you are the amended guidelines for Major Crimes Division standards and procedures as approved by the Board of Police Commissioners. This was in response to a motion introduced by Councilmember Parks that there be amendments in this particular guidelines and directions in order for the Inspector General to have access to and be able to audit the information that would be contained within that room that Chief Downing can speak to specifically as to the needs of that. There were a series of meetings with the City Attorney, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Department, and the guidelines were amended to allow for the specific auditing and oversight, and those are contained, I believe it's on page 21, section 9 of the policies and procedures. The motion from Councilmembers Parks was for us to provide the information to the committee, so the information is transmitted to you today for information, and there's an amended transmittal report that we submitted. It is not for approval, it is for information today for the body. Chief Downing and Captain Sambar are here to answer specific questions as relates to the operation, the Inspector General's role, and as you know, we are in the process of recruiting for a new Inspector General, and in anticipation of this, one of the requirements in the recruitment for the Inspector General is that they would obtain the appropriate federal clearances to be able to have access to this room. So that is in the process. Whomever is selected, that would be one of the requirements, that they would have that ability. As we operationally see this, the Inspector General, not a designated staff member, the Inspector General would have unfettered access to the room, would be able to review the audit and documents completed by the federal folks, the U.S. Attorney's Office, who is responsible for auditing, be able then to prepare a report to the Board of Police Commissioners that would be not releasing any confidential information, but would assure that the Inspector General has reviewed the guidelines and ensure that the L.A. Police Department is in compliance with guidelines that are established by the Commission within the guidelines that are before you today for your information. Chief Downing, again, can talk about the specifics of the room, but that is the piece of the oversight of the Inspector General's office. Also, as part of reviewing these, we did make some changes in the guidelines that were housekeeping. In the past, staff from the policy section of my office would assist the two commissioners in an annual review. Since the Inspector General's office has established a robust auditing unit, they have taken on that responsibility rather than our staff, and have worked to complete the past reviews of Major Crimes Division to ensure that they're in compliance with the policies and procedures. With that said, I think that answers the issues relevant to the Police Commission's involvement. I would defer to Chief Downing unless you have any questions for me at this specific
Just one
point.
question on when you said the two commissioners would review, they're going to review the work product of the IG?
Yes, sir.
Only. So if the IG chose to look into something, then that would be reflective. If they didn't, the commission wouldn't know.
That's correct, because they would not possess the appropriate clearances.
Right.
That's where the Inspector General would have access, would review all the documents in the room, and prepare, quite frankly, their report in that room to be reviewed by the supervising agent of the FBI to ensure that there's no release of classified information.
Okay. And so does the agreement call for the IG to specify before he goes to talk to the FBI about what they want, or is he just can show up anytime and say, I'm interested in this and that?
He has unfettered access to the room and would be able to go into the room with notifying LAPD, go into the room and could do two things. One, review the audits that have been completed by the federal government to ensure that they're in compliance with the guidelines, review those audits, and also at any time review any of the LAPD working papers to ensure that LAPD is in compliance with the guidelines established by the Commission.
Okay.
Chief?
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, this is Captain Steve Sambar. He is the new commanding officer of major crimes, replacing Captain Greg Hall, and happy to have him aboard. The substantive changes really on page 3 of the guidelines. It defines what the SCIF actually is, which is the Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. The local law enforcement has gotten a little bit closer to the intelligence table, and the threat now that we're seeing has transnational reach. So it is really essential that we have a facility such as this where we can get classified information. The beauty of having this SCIF in our own facility is that for the first time really anywhere in the United States, municipal law enforcement is going to co-lead a joint terrorism task force, which means we have more leadership in a task force, and it is more city-centric. This specific task force will be around criminal enterprises that either feed, recruit, or have pathways to terror networks. So the strength of our department is that we're here, and we're here for a long time, as you know. And we can complement the FBI's mission that the President gave them for investigating terrorism by having it housed in our facility. The substantive changes in these guidelines start on page 32 and they go through page 35. And the Police Commission maintains its responsibility with regard to the guidelines. The difference that we had here is these guidelines were always for the anti-terrorism intelligence section, for intelligence cases only. Because of the SCIF and because of the Counterterrorism Squad 10, which will be contained in the SCIF, this goes through and talks about how the Police Commission can use the Inspector General to request audits. The Inspector General has access. They can look at things. If the Police Commission has a concern, they use the Police Commission as their arm to get into the SCIF and make that inspection. And I think it just really gives us a lot of strength. It puts us in a position of strength to protect the city further from acts or planned acts of terrorism.
And I think we've always said all along it's a tremendous advancement in law enforcement that the federal and state and local levels are finally really sharing rather than confrontational as they used to be. So no one ever questioned that issue. I think the question was, what were the liabilities to LAPD and our involvement in this? And I think you've answered that. So thank you. Any other issues?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I was actually in the committee that this came to first before Bernard Parks was on the committee. And he's the one that brought that up. And through my lens, it didn't even occur to me to ask that question because obviously the feds trump local, and the fact that they were in our building and we're sharing space and we're collaborating and what have you. When he brought up the point, basically the department was honest and said, well, they have jurisdiction. Obviously if they want to let somebody with proper clearance in there and dialogue with them, it's up to them. And Bernard basically said, well, the fact that they're in our building, we probably have the appropriate ability to renegotiate that relationship, and here we are today. So the reason why I wanted to bring that up is all of us elected officials bring our various perspectives. And even though I chaired that committee and my staff and I looked at it and everything looked good, and as the chairman just said, this is a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous step forward. It's something that hopefully will be appropriately and carefully duplicated in as many jurisdictions around the country where you see that kind of collaboration and cooperation, and hopefully we have safer streets and we can be more preventative. But the reason why I'm saying this is because it really bothers me, and I'm not speaking to LAPD, I'm speaking to the press, I'm speaking to third parties, I'm speaking to everybody who, whenever Bernard Parks brings up something and he really says something poignant or something that has value when it comes to the police department. And for example, basically what happened is based on his questions in the committee, we didn't go as fast as we thought we were going to go with this process. And as a result of his questions, here we are today with a much better relationship. And again, especially since we're going to be blueprinting this, hopefully for the rest of the country, we really did prove that we could have a better, proper balance. And I bring this up, and I'm mainly speaking to the press and third parties. Every time Bernard Park brings something up to the police department, too many people just say, there goes Bernard Parks again. He's got an axe to grind. He never could get over blah, 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 blah. Well, the fact of the matter is, he does bring a tremendous perspective. He was the chief of police. He did grow up in the police department as a professional, and I have tremendous respect for his willingness and ability to keep things into perspective and to bring things up that are relevant. And this is a perfect example of something that was relevant, something that the rest of us didn't bring up. Perhaps we would have brought it up sooner or later, but the bottom line is he brought it up at the first opportunity. The department responsibly said, that's interesting. Let us see what we can do. And here we are with a different agreement with the feds and a better understanding and a much, much more appropriate relationship. So thank you very much for all of your good and hard work to bring it to where it really should be.
If I could just give a little background to support exactly what you said. I mean, the councilman brought up the issue of civilian oversight, which is a strong principle that forms the foundation of our department, and also the issue of transparency. And as a result of that concern, we took it very seriously. In fact, over probably 3 months, with the help of the city attorney, Julie Raffish and Carlos de la Guerra, negotiating with Washington, D.C. FBI headquarters over this process, word by word by word. And as a result of that effort, I think we have a more authentic partnership with the FBI. And I think that because of this experience that we went through, the way we work together in our skiff in headquarters will be much more authentic and credible. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving us that perspective as well, because when you negotiate with the feds or even talk to them, I can only imagine what it's like sometimes. Figuratively, they roll their eyes and say, come on, we're the feds. There's really nothing to talk about. Well, the fact of the matter is we are the second largest city in the country. We do have a lot of responsibility. These are their constituents and they are our constituents. And the fact of the matter is we should not concede just by title anything. We should always assert ourselves and make sure that we are stating our position, that we're confident in where we're at, and the end result is it's not about ego, of us being able to puff out our chest and say we can go fight with the feds. No, this was not a fight with them. To me, this was an appropriate negotiation about the various levels of government and the kind of relationship we're supposed to have regardless of rank, regardless of title. At the end of the day, it's about what's best for this city, what's best for this country. And again, I'm very proud of the fact that we're here today in a much more appropriate place, much more accurate place, because this is probably going to be the blueprint of the relationship, hopefully, that other local governments have with the feds when they collaborate the way we are. So thank you.
And unlike other relationships, it was a partnership rather than a superior government telling us what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. So thank you very much. I think that solves the issue. Ms. Perry, anything?
I'm just glad Mr. Cardenas said what he said. I totally, completely agree. We're all going to benefit from this.
Mr. Zine.
While we benefit, is the federal government going to share any of the costs? Operate?
They are spending $1.5 million with the tenant improvements of the facility up in headquarters building. So they're bearing all the costs for the construction of the skiff.
Any additional costs that, other than our personnel, that they're going to share in?
No, it'll be staffed with 4 LAPD, 4 FBI, and 2 others.
Okay. Thank you.
And that is that a receive and file then?
Note and file, please.
Note and file, because it was a motion, so.
Information on the report that's submitted.
Okay, so that would be a note and file that's objected to. No objections. Item number, I think it takes us to number 8, but we were waiting for a amendment. Do we have the amendment yet on 8? No. All right, let's take item number 9 then.
Number 9, Department of Animal Services report relative to the development and implementation of an administrative citation program for the department or other city departments.
Good morning, council members. Linda Barth from the Department of Animal Services. What you have before you today is a request that the council endorse this idea of trying to move forward with an administrative citation program for the city and formally ask the city attorney and city chief legislative analyst and the CAO to assist our department and also to enlist other departments that might like to participate in a program by which there's an alternative besides just some sort of a notice that has no financial penalty impact, or the other extreme, a citation to Superior Court where ultimately whatever fines and penalties go to the court and not to the city, but that we introduce this middle tool that would help us improve our enforcement ability and make people realize how serious some of the violations of humane laws are. At the same time, it would should self-fund itself and maybe even bring in a revenue stream. So our department is very enthusiastic and our board is enthusiastic about doing this. We think there may be other departments that also would like to avail themselves of this. It wouldn't just be animal services. We do have a little bit of a caveat. Although this is a fantastic program, it will take an investment of resources to make it work. A lot of preparatory work needs to go on, for example, defining the different kinds of citation, when it's a notice, when it would be an admin citation, when it should be a citation to court. We need to develop an adjudication process for people who want to challenge their administrative citation, and I know the city attorney is actually already looking into a citywide adjudication process, so that is kind of already moving through the system. We also need to think about what staffing resources would have to be invested in this. When the citations come, just like in court, someone inputs that, they put it in a docket, they track it, they bill for it, they schedule a hearing, they schedule collections and so forth, and we have no infrastructure right now to do that. So there's research to be done. There's looking at whether there's economies of scale if multiple departments do this. That reduces the investment. We might look at doing something like parking tickets where there's an outside third party that handles that, since this would be a new program. But all of that will take some time and investigation, and this is the first important step, so that we're all collaborating and investing all of our experience and energies to try to develop and implement this program.
Okay. As I recall, there's an instruction in Schedule 8 in the new budget to do this as well.
Yes, that is correct. And that relates to another step in this process, which is the development of a modification to the Los Angeles Municipal Code that would allow our department as well as other departments to be able to issue administrative citations. State law allows that, but individual municipalities have to then have their own enabling legislation to tap into that. And we don't have it yet, for at least that our department could access. So that's one step, and that's one of the important steps, as in addition to some of these other steps that we will have to undertake.
Okay, so the Schedule H is just the instruction for the city attorney to draft, but the program's still got to be baked, fully baked yet.
That's correct.
We're not
So
there yet.
actually-
So
yes.
was there, and I didn't see, was there any revenue stream created in the mayor's budget connected to this, or just the Schedule H instruction to begin?
Just the Schedule 8 instruction, no revenue stream for the upcoming fiscal year.
So the sooner we get it, the better, but
We
as far as
agree.
impacting the budget.
But it's,
Now,
it's
what do you think the investment of resources will be budgetary? Are you talking about city attorney time, or more on your?
Well, it depends on how the adjudication process might get developed. If city attorney did something centralized, I don't know how that would then sort of get shared or amortized amongst departments. In our case, we're thinking there needs to be at least a couple staff people who would input the citations and track them and do the billing and so forth. Maybe the development of a program. Or if we did a request for proposals, then we still have to go through those steps. And maybe that would be a way of a little less front-loaded cost, even though we wouldn't then get the full value of the citation. So right now, we figure there's probably at least 2,000 or 3,000 of the notices that we issue that absolutely might be better off as administrative citations. They'd have more impact on the person who's violating the law, and it could be more than that. We issue about 20,000 notices to comply every year. I don't think all 20,000 of them probably are appropriate for an administrative penalty, because some of them really are, I just didn't know that I needed to do this. And a notice is the more appropriate step. So there is an opportunity, I think, to yield some revenue, but it will also take some assistance of the city attorney to develop the guidelines, so we know, so our officers have a consistent methodology for enforcing this, and we don't have one doing it one way and another doing it another. And that's, again, it's an investment with a great yield at the other end, but it does require some investment.
Very good. And for Ms. Perry and Mr. Zine, who were added on Friday to the Budget Committee, you will be having this discussion beginning tomorrow. But there's been some discussion about additional fine type programs within Public Works that replicate what's going on in parking enforcement. and some other building and safety as well. So we may be looking at a combined, almost municipal court system again, where for administrative court type of thing, we're going to bring all the departments into that. So you'll be hearing more about that. But
That'd be exciting for us.
Ms. Cardenas.
When it comes to at least your department, and a citation is actually required, that activity of a citation is actually required of your staff. Do you have a rough estimate yet as to how much it's costing your department, and is there a process in which we can track the cost to the city as a whole to process a citation, regardless of what kind it is? I mean, these citations of a particular kind. I'm just curious about that.
We haven't done a financial analysis yet of exactly how long it might take to do this kind of a citation process. It's maybe a hour work for our officer on a regular citation to court now, plus then the time to appear. So a lot depends on, sometimes the courts will just charge the fine and dismiss. We don't issue a lot of citations to court right now, maybe 30 or 40 a month. They're really for egregious violations or people who have repetitive violations. They're not used extensively by our officers. So I don't really have an estimate right now.
So, for example, if we were just to try to extrapolate an idea as to whether or not a $100 citation of this kind would actually provide cost recovery, it might not, $100 might not even be true cost recovery.
It might not.
All is said and done. And I use the word might, and so did you, because we really don't have a procedure or an analysis table that we use yet.
Correct.
Well, what I'd like to ask of your department, especially since your department seems to be under attack when it comes to the budget, as far as your responsibilities are going up and your budget is staying somewhat stagnant and going down, regardless of those responsibilities, I think it's important for each department to try to, for your sake at least, to try to figure out internally how to track that kind of measure of what the costs are to, at least to your department. And obviously, if you have to submit it to the controller's office or what have you, a CC copy or whatever, in the process, obviously, there's miscellaneous costs on behalf of the city to whatever departments are involved in any fashion on such a procedure. So I think it's important for us to do that. I'm sure we should have done it decades ago, but we haven't. So if you could, with what resources you're afforded, if you could start figuring out how to do that, and I'll be more than happy to help you in any way from my vantage point to try to figure out how we can arrive at those kinds of extrapolations.
We have done that for the staff that operates our animal care centers. It's a good and useful exercise, so we'll start working on that. All kinds of enforcement, both citation as well as just notices. They have a big cost and nothing comes. When we just issue a notice, we may have to go back and visit 2 or 3 times. Yeah. Again, that's why administrative citations would be great, and we need to figure out what the right cost would be.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Zine. No. Well, that brings us to the public comment portion of this. So there's a lady who doesn't know much about it, but we'll bring her up anyway, Ms. Phyllis Doherty.
Is this your first time speaking on this?
Just learned about this item.
Thank you so much for bringing this in, Phyllis Doherty. There's someone that deserves some credit. His name is Greg Randall, Animal Control Officer, who is in charge of wildlife. 10 years ago, he wrote this up on paper for me. And after that, we started, when Deliberto was here, to put it is already put into the animal care rules. Then it bogged down again. That was about 1995. That was so hard just to get to that point. It wasn't until the other animal control departments basically started using this. 4 years ago was when I really started, because I had something in my hands then to say this will work. Santa Ana's been doing this for years, and she said that she can't even remember them ever having an appeal. They're cautious about how they do it. They're prudent in it. And you know, it is designed for the fact that we pay animal services for the strays to be picked up, for the animals that can't help themselves, for the injured animals, and the people that don't know, to give them information. When people are deliberately violating the law, and the officers have already been out there and they just refuse to create humane conditions for their animal, they need to pay for that. That's above and beyond what the taxpayer should be paying for. So I'm grateful that you're doing it in this way, and it will bring so much better conditions for animals. I know animal control officers that have been out 20 times, I'm not exaggerating, on one call. The same over and over and over, and if it's bogged down the courts, it costs us money. So thank you to you, to Linda Barth especially. She's the only one that has really, really listened and felt this was a good idea. To City Attorney's Office, who said already, we want to do the hearings, because that would make it so much easier for everyone. And this will make a better life for people and for animals. Thank you.
Stay right where you are. We're going to get you in just another 30 seconds, so go ahead.
Yeah, what was the name of that individual that brought this up years ago?
Pardon me?
Randall.
Ted Randall?
Oh, Greg.
Greg?
G-R-E-G-G Randall. He's now a wildlife officer.
Okay, so he's not with the department?
He's with the department. Oh, yeah, but I mean, he's been in charge of the wildlife area.
Oh, I thought maybe Park and Recs.
No, he's still with the department, and he's been a very hard worker. There have been many things far above and beyond the call of duty that he has handled through the years.
Well, you described many of our employees, so thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Stay there, fellas. Okay. Okay, that concludes this item. There's no objection, and this would be also, since it's in the budget, this is just a note file.
You could approve the recommendations of Animal Services to request the continued work from the city attorney, CAO, and CLA.
That'd be the motion. No objection. Okay. Item number 8, we don't have an amendment yet on, so we will.
I can leave?
Nope. We'll hold item number, you're done. We'll hold item number 8 off calendar for the next meeting, and that brings us to the end of the regular meeting, and we have a public comment from Phyllis Doherty.
Thank you for that. And this will be one of my shorter presentations, but I think it's really important.
No, it's a public comment. We're going to special.
Oh, no, I thought he was going to announce the item.
Yeah, we're good.
You know that 64 positions are planning to be cut from the Department of Animal Services. And I brought something where, pictures are better than words. This is an 11-year-old girl that was attacked within the last couple of weeks. There was a 6-day-old baby that was killed by a dog also recently. These are some pictures you may have seen before, but it's been a while. I'm just bringing these in to remind you what happens and what happens to people when we let the animal situation get out of control. And we're fighting to keep these officers so that we don't have this happening on the street, so that this is not your child or someone you love or in your neighborhood. We have a preponderance of pit bulls now, and I'm not picking on the breed. I love the breed, but I do understand them. We know that they are bred to attack, and especially animals, but now it's getting out of control because they're no longer using the care and breeding them to keep them from the human aggression out of the bloodlines. So this is going to increase. The majority of the dogs out there breeding are pit bulls because they are the strongest. We are spay and neutering the other breeds, but because these animals are being specifically bred for the purpose of fighting, that's my next campaign I've been working on for a long time. We need to address animals being bred for fighting in this city so that we can cut down that type of thing happening. And also, as these dogs breed with the other breeds, they breed with a golden retriever that's not spayed, they breed with a chow that's not spayed, with whatever breed comes along. It's not even identifiable, so we're actually creating a monster in that we will have these bloodlines in every breed of dog that we take in. Right now, the only surplus dog we have that we don't have things under control are pit bulls. 60 to 70% of our shelter population is pit bulls. If we get this under control, and there's a way to do it humanely and in the right manner, we will actually have solved our pet overpopulation problem for the city in terms of dogs.
Thank you, Ms. Doherty. That brings us to the conclusion of the regular meeting, so the meeting is adjourned. We will now go into special meeting, and the clerk needs to flop the tape over.
I'm sorry, I thought we had moved to the special meeting. You got to follow.
We did work. Great. Great. You're not the third time will be the charm.
Right.
Life is it. Life is it. Harry makes it.
For little John.
It's okay. Continue.
Greg, this came in June of '09 by Jack. Why didn't he ever hear it? He did the motion. It was his motion.
He introduced it. He doesn't do. He just introduced.
He did the motion.
He forgot about it.
Jeez.
Already got what we wanted.
I would have mentioned that.
All right, item number 1.
Item 1, motion Weiss Gruel requesting that the city attorney prepare an ordinance to effect additional requirements for door-to-door solicitors.
We Good morning.
Good morning, committee members. Richard T. Thank, Executive Director of the Board of Police Commissioners. I'll start as some background to this and then give it to the department. As background, in mid-2009 or so, there was an incident in the Valley when then Deputy Chief Mike Moore was the Bureau Commander. There was a reach out to the city attorney, to the Board of Police Commissioners, to our police permit section, to see if we had a regulation scheme for door-to-door salespeople, which we do not. With that, there was work with then Councilmember Weiss's office, which ultimately resulted in the motion before you today. And that motion was in committee. There was a call to me, I believe, from Captain Sherman several months ago after an incident in the Valley, asking again if we had any regulation over
Keep going.
over permits related to door-to-door salespersons. I indicated no, but I was aware of this motion from the past. So with that, reach out to your staff, Councilmember Smith, relocated the motion and have it before the body today. Basically, the Board of Police Commissioners, again, does not permit door-to-door salespeople, and let me give you some background of a permitting process and why we would support the regulation scheme that is in this motion. Currently, if you want to apply for a police permit, you go to the Office of Finance, you pay the fee for that permit, whatever that fee is. There's an application that would go with that. Along with your application would be a receipt that you have submitted for a live scan fingerprint check. That fingerprint check is now taking 2 to 6 weeks for that fingerprint information to come to the Board of Police Commissioners. So there would be that lag time between the time an individual finds out when they're going to be a door-to-door salesperson, which is often in a very short, limited time, or they're going to do that solicitation. They're not going to do it for a long period of time. So we think operationally, requiring someone to go to Office of Finance, submit an application, do the live scan, and while we're waiting for the results, they could be done with the door-to-door solicitation piece. Whereas what is in this motion would allow the department, I believe, to accomplish its goal anyway, which would require a person over the age of 18 who could only be doing the commercial door-to-door solicitation, that they would have to have a copy of the business tax registration certificate and a valid government ID card. So if officers see individuals going door-to-door, as we all know those are ruses for burglaries or other kinds of activity that would be criminal in nature, it would give the officers the appropriate probable cause to make contact with someone either in response to a citizen's call for service or an observation officers might make while on routine patrol. They would then be able to, again, ask for the business tax registration certificate, valid government ID. If they don't have the business tax registration certificate, with the creation of a new LAMC section which would allow enforcement by peace officers, they could then issue the appropriate citation, make an arrest or a release from custody if that was appropriate. So this is a much more expeditious process, would not require the permitting. If we were to do a permitting scheme, I believe there would be more people who would be doing door-to-door solicitation without a permit, and the reality of being able to deal with that, I think, becomes more difficult, where this really accomplishes the goal, which is to give officers legal authority to approach someone they see doing this activity or in response to a call and carry out the public safety. So with that, that's the background, and I'll be happy to answer any questions from the Commission's perspective, and would defer to the members at the table with me.
Okay. For one, we have a similar process, don't we, now for solicitation of fundraising, 501c3 charitable.
Right. That's done through the Board of Police Commissioners through our charitable giving section.
And they have to have a permit.
Right. They have to have a permit.
You have a similar process.
Exactly. So what we would suggest, I think, with this, under the tax code of the LAMC, currently an individual must have a business tax registration certificate to do door-to-door solicitation. All we're suggesting by creating a new enforcement section would be that if you're going to do solicitation, you would have to have a copy of that business tax registration certificate and a valid ID you would show to a peace officer upon demand. This would become enforceable, whereas the tax code section really is non-enforceable. It's a tax piece, not a public safety piece.
Okay. And other cities do this?
Yes, there are some cities that do a permitting scheme, but again, the size of our city would make that, I think, difficult from a resource perspective, number one, but also, again, the constant turnover, because a lot of this is going to be situations where you could have door-to-door solicitation where individuals bring in young people in vans, 15-passenger van, they dump them in a neighborhood, they're there for a day and they're gone. Well, they're not going to get permits, but again, they should have a business tax registration certificate that each one of those solicitors would carry with them. You have individuals who are doing door-to-door carpet cleaning, selling alarms, doing roofing materials, on and on and on. So most of those are going to be in a very confined neighborhood for one day, and then they're gone.
Okay.
And so
Some
we
of them
think this
even
piece.
interpret DWP workers. Some door-to-door folk actually impersonate
Absolutely,
DWP workers.
absolutely.
Those,
So-
those tend to be not so good people.
No, and some of the folks that we're talking about who do this solicitation, in many ways, it's a front for looking if anybody's home and then commit a residential burglary or other type of
And that
assault.
was the case we had in Topanga, which was a great case on the part of slows. One last thing, when you mentioned RFC, would this be a wobbler? You could do an RFC, or you could take them into custody if they're, like, you've warned them 10 times and they didn't do it?
It would be,
Otherwise, it'd be an RFC.
to me, that'd be, as all of our city ordinances, I believe they're all misdemeanors and arrestable and/or citable at the officer's discretion.
Mr. Zine.
Thank you. Under 2109 of the LAMC Finance Code, I was paying attention, officer. This was brought to my attention by Officer Padron, who's out at Topanga. They tried to deal with this with the Department of Finance, and it's been very frustrating. And the reason I wanted to have the senior lead here is they deal with us on a daily basis in the field. We're the policymakers. They deal with the problems. If you can just explain some of the situations you've had, I know our deputy city attorney is here, also our neighborhood prosecutor, some of the concerns you've had and how this would assist you in protecting the folks in the West San Fernando Valley.
Certainly. Alex Padron, senior lead for Topanga area, specifically Canoga Park. I can recall within the last 8 months of a handful of incidents that have been related, tied to door-to-door commercial solicitations where they conducted burglaries and or were using as a ruse to conduct burglaries or attempt burglaries. This motion was produced after an incident in June of '09, but we had our incident in December of last year where the gentleman was using it, door-to-door solicitation as a ruse to conduct a burglary and sexual assault. So I can tell you specifically in personal experience that we have door-to-door salesmen that are burglars and use it as a guise for burglary, and we need some kind of enforcement tool that lets us stop and investigate the individuals, because there currently is nothing on the books for us right now.
And then the issue, Mr. Tiefenk, you mentioned 18. It says in here 16, and if they're under 16, what would be required under the age of 16? Because as I'm reading, requires all persons over the age of 16 to engage in door-to-door solicitations. I think you mentioned 18. But what do we do with the ones that are under either 18 or 16? We've got to clarify whether it's 16 or 18.
Well, the motion, again, I was in error when I stated that would be age of 16. These are, again, commercial door-to-door solicitations, not the young lady selling Girl Scout cookies, et cetera, but anyone who would do a door-to-door solicitation must be the age of 16 or older.
Okay, so
for profit purposes.
For profit. This is commercial. This is for commercial for
this
profit.
isn't for religious purposes, the watchtower, those
No,
groups.
that would not apply to these groups.
But as far as the enforcement to protect the community, the ruse of a burglar, the disguise, whatever the case may be, for your purposes for enforcement, would this work 16 and over? Would this qualify to give you what you need for your enforcement purposes?
Yes, I think that falls within the realm of most of the guys that I've encountered in the past doing door-to-door salesmen. They're usually early 20s, late teens. So I think 16 is appropriate age.
This also restricts solicitation hours from no earlier than 8 a.m., no later than 8 p.m., which currently is silent in any ordinance.
Well, I know there's been some news reports of someone knocks on the front door, a senior answers the door, person comes in, or they go around the back, they burglarize, they do, I mean, there's all kinds of situations happen. So I appreciate you bringing it to my attention. I noticed by the motion, it was first brought up June of 26 by a former council member, and I don't know why it sat, but as far as the city attorney, have you done any work on this?
No, I don't think we've received it.
Okay, so it hasn't gone to the city attorney.
We are instructions today.
So what we will do, and how long do you think that would take to get complete?
On the mic.
We would certainly request at least 60 days. as a
Okay.
turnaround.
So then it would come back, it would go then to council,
That's correct.
and then, so within a couple months, we'd have the ordinance in place. Okay. And Captain Sherman, you're the commanding officer of
Topanga area.
Topanga. And I appreciate you being here.
Yes, sir.
And I appreciate the deputy chief being here. The reason I wanted the senior lead here is we had well, you were at the meeting which we had at the Boys and Girls Club. That's what brought to my attention, and I talked to Irma, who's here, my district director, interim chief of staff, to say we got to get something done. So government worked fast. We were there last week at that meeting, and here it is Monday morning. So I appreciate you all coming down for this. It's our goal to give you the tools you need to do the job. And if we're not doing that, then we're derelict in our duties. So I appreciate you coming down, Captain. Do you have any comments on this particular?
No, this is very necessary to get this tool. We don't have the tool today.
And that's what we want to do. So I appreciate y'all coming down. That's why it was important for me to hear from the street officer who deals with it. Because when I was on the street, these problems, if they happen when you're a motor sergeant, you don't deal with them. But obviously for the patrol officer, the senior lead, it's a major issue and a major concern for the safety of the public. So you get my support. Thank you.
Thank you. Any examples of other jurisdictions that have this in place in a local ordinance when it comes to commercial soliciting on private property?
I don't know any off the top of my head, but I would say that most cities are going to have some level of a door-to-door solicitation regulation. It could be a requirement as part of their tax code, like we have under the business tax registration. It could be you must register with the police department. I know in my personal experience, the cities that I've worked in, that there has been a regulatory scheme, not out of the police department, but it generally would come out in smaller cities, city clerk's office or the Office of Finance.
Okay. Well, the only reason why I bring that up is sometimes we save a little time and energy if we're not reinventing the wheel. Certainly, if they're referencing the state, the fact that the state gives us authority in what code or what have you, and then it's a little easier for us to create our own. Not that we have to be identical, but to create our own, especially when perhaps some other cities may have been challenged, et cetera, in court, and then they were able to refine it and actually get it to a place where it is defensible. And
I'll be happy to work with the city attorney's office from my experience.
My staff actually did some work on that, and they found out that Ventura, Pleasant Hills, and Palo Alto all have similar ordinances, so you might look to them.
So in enforcement, when you see someone walking down the street going door to door, or someone gives you a call, this would give you authority to stop that person, ask for the ID. If they have ID, they're legit, fine. If they're not, then there's a problem.
Correct. Currently, unless I get a phone call, a radio call, or a citizen complaint to my city cell phone or office line, I have no reasonable suspicion or probable cause to stop that gentleman.
This will take care of that part.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And also, when you do look into that, if you could find out if any of those jurisdictions, such as the ones that were mentioned, if they have any statistics or what have you, and especially when it comes to their success rate as far as how they feel that it's affected, such as a deterrent, et cetera, people knowing that people are getting stopped legitimately, perhaps they have a lot less of that unsightly activity going on, such as what we've had a problem with, people impersonating like DWP workers or what have you, and just trying to gain access or scoping out the place. One more question. Back to our current authority. What is the situation again with not-for-profit solicitation? Not religious, because that's a whole different thing, but, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts.
We have no regulation in that venue at all, sir.
Okay.
But they're under 16 years of age anyway.
Right, but
Not all.
in any nonprofit, there is no regulation over profit or nonprofit today. The only requirement for a commercial solicitor would be to get a business tax registration certificate. If you're a nonprofit door-to-door solicitor, you are not required to have a business tax registration.
And the reason why I asked that question, if somebody actually does their homework and say whatever solicitation they're doing, legitimate or illegitimate or what have you, whether they're faking it or what have you, if an officer were to approach them and they say, well, I'm just, soliciting for the Optimist Club or something like that, then would we just basically ask them, well, what materials are you disseminating? Or, it's kind of awkward for us to ask them a question if we don't have anything that speaks to the not-for-profit solicitation. What happens in that situation? If somebody says, well, I'm door knocking for a not-for-profit.
Well, then they might fall under the 4409 LAMC, which is the charitable organization requirement, and they might fall under that section.
Yeah, but I know that when somebody has an event, then they have to go get a permit for that event, right? And then they actually get a document saying you've been permitted for that event. But what I'm saying is, if they're door knocking for a not-for-profit, are they required to have something with them that shows that they're connected to that not-for-profit, or
I don't have the answer to that, sir.
Not to my knowledge.
Well, maybe that.
But you get what I'm saying? I mean, even
Yeah, I
if somebody's
understand, sir.
soliciting for commercial purposes, then what happens is, if they want to disguise themselves, they just say, well, somebody approaches me, I'm just going to tell them, you know.
If I may, I suspect, having encountered these individuals before, they are very much want to fly under the radar. When you talk to them, when I've encountered them before, they don't want to tell me what hotel they're staying at, they don't want to tell me who their bosses are. It's a very, very much fly-by-night organization. I suspect once given the tool and once officers just have the ability to investigate them, they're not going to want to be around town for the suspects that are possibly doing the
Which
illegal
goes back
activity.
to the other jurisdictions that have actually, like Mr. Smith's staff found out that there are a few jurisdictions near us who have actually implemented something like this for commercial solicitation. So that's my point. I agree with what you're saying. You're out on the streets dealing with this stuff on a day-to-day basis, and all of your officers are. So I agree that what you said is very factual. Yet at the same time, I was just curious to see if, again, some people get real nifty and sophisticated. And again, that's probably the minority number of folk that are going to actually try to get that cute and smart about it. But this is definitely something we need.
But you'd still have PC under this ordinance to stop and question the individual, and through that questioning, you could find something or not, but at least they'll give them the tool to stop that person, which they don't have now.
And that was the difference in the case you had, where your senior lead officers doing good police work, saw the guys around, but it was a consensual stop. They didn't have to tell you anything. Now they would have to tell you. And in that case, you had to wait a few days or a week until evidence came that, oh, this is something going on in that neighborhood. These are the guys we think are it. Now you'd actually have the right to question them, where you didn't previously. It was a consensual stop.
Absolutely.
It gives you the PC, which is what you need to make the stop to make it legit, so that's good. Okay.
All right. Mr. Perry has disappeared, so, Mr. Curtis.
I just can't help myself.
We'll help.
Albanese, got anything to comment on this? You haven't said a word. Yeah, Chief.
Highly paid,
I'm glad you asked, Councilmember, because I didn't want to drive all the way down here and not think it to say something, you know. I think it will give us a tool. As I sit here and I'm listening to all the comments, we do have other tools in the toolbox, including consensual encounter. We can always approach people and ask them what their business is without officially detaining them. And as Councilmember Zine just mentioned, this is a tool to open the door. And if we don't like their responses, if we think something is amiss, then we use other tools to drill further down to make sure the community's safe, to make sure we're representing public safety, and we're not letting somebody loose that has ill intent within that community. So that's foremost on my mind. In fact, when we're done here, I'm going to debrief a little bit out in the hallway, because I think this is important. I don't want to lose sight of that. This is an important first step to give us a tool in the toolbox, and to hold people accountable in terms of certain criteria that they need to comply with before they go out into the communities and go door to door. But there are also some other tools that we have, including truancy. Young people out in the communities Monday through Friday, supposed to be in school, that's a tool. Consensual encounter is a tool. And then when we get the wrong answer and we think something's up, then we need to act on our instincts and our experience and do the right thing.
Again, I'm not an officer. I don't deal with this on a day-to-day basis.
We have high standards.
Yes. By the presence and the fact that you have one badge, I'm sure it is. But
calls into question the whole policy.
This tool applies to somebody, say an officer's driving down a residential street and they see somebody traversing, knocking on doors or what have you on private property. But it doesn't apply if somebody's just walking down the sidewalk.
Correct.
Right. In other words, the fact that they go onto private property and there's an appearance of solicitation or what have you, that's what triggers it, right?
Correct. It would be reasonable for the officer to sit and watch the gentleman for a couple minutes as he door knocks one door, doesn't get an answer, responds to the next house, door knocks again, doesn't get an answer, maybe the third house down the road.
Now, again, I'm not an officer, but say all of a sudden you get on Fillmore Street in Pacoima, somebody calls and there's an officer in the neighborhood and they say, hey, something looks fishy. This guy, my neighbor's not home, and this guy was on their property for about 10 minutes, and he just started walking back down the street. Looks like he's going door to door. And then all of a sudden, the officer's driving down the street. They got a description of him. If they don't see him do it again in front of the officer, the call, is that enough for them to stop the person and ask them the same questions?
In your example, yes, because the radio call generated the complaint, and it's the officer's responsibility to investigate that complaint. Notwithstanding the radio call, if an officer is driving down the street and knows this has been a problem, maybe he got a citizen's complaint, maybe I told the officers that work my basic car, hey, I now have a crew in this area, I need you to monitor them. They would just go sit on the streets, watch the individual conduct 2 or 3 door-to-door knocks, no success. Maybe the fourth, the person answers, they have a conversation, the suspect walks away. You can engage the homeowner. Hey, would that gentleman just ask, oh, he was selling XYZ? Then we go ahead and make contact with the suspect or door-to-door salesman.
That's good. Okay. We do have reserved positions, though.
Take note. That's how you do it.
Is there anything?
No, I'm ready to vote.
Okay, that concludes the discussion then. I presume the committee will then vote to instruct the city attorney to report back with a draft ordinance in 60 days. All right. That'll be the order. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it very much. That concludes the special item number 1 and this committee's special agenda. Meeting is adjourned.
Oh, yeah. Because you're going to miss that. You got to do more work. My privilege.
No, it's been my privilege.